Isn't this just a magnificent Sunday morning? What a joy it is to worship with you all. Wow. Wow. I wish you could see what I'm seeing now. The perspective, I'm quite serious. To be able to see faces light up as our tremendous fine arts ministry, through dance, through instruments, through the different choirs, just have brought God's Spirit into this place. I do feel called upon to, just in case you're one of the many parents I saw who were responding to your children and wanting a response from them, in case your children do not respond back to you the same way you were responding to them, let me do it on your child's behalf. I love it. And you know who you were. Beautiful. Let me give you a little bit of a background to what I'm about to say in the scripture and my sermon. I do want to preface it by saying that maybe a secret of preachers is that they preach with one audience in mind, what they need to hear themselves, and the congregation basically overhears it. And this has been especially true for me in this Joy of Giving Back series that I've done throughout the month of October, because we just live, and I don't need to tell you this, we live in such a tumultuous, stress-filled, divisive world that it's really good to get right back to the basics. And the basic for the Christian is the joy we have because God gave us God's Son, gave us life, gave us grace. And the joy is simply responding to that. So 3 weeks ago I talked about the key attitude we ought to have, which is just to remember that we are totally dependent. We're dependent upon God for life. We're dependent upon each other for sustained life and for fulfillment. And don't ever forget the belly button. That was the symbol. We're dependent. And once you get into that sign of dependence that you have, well, then we moved. We moved to wanting to share that joy of surprising someone. So a couple of weeks ago, I challenged you to put a smile on someone's face by doing a kind act, picking up a tab or making a call, dropping a card, whatever. And I love some of the stories that I got back. The simple joy of responding. A metaphor, if you will, for how we respond to the smile that God put on our faces through Christ. And last week I said that it's important for us to really be conscientious on how we deal with our stuff, because too often our hearts are umbilically connected to our stuff. And to be able to separate the clutter of our lives, all the stuff, enables us to have room for the true treasures that God gives us through Christ. The treasure of peace and of joy and of hope and of compassion. Today, we're going to now conclude the series by the joy of looking ahead. I want to use as the image for this a symbol, a concrete symbol, quite literally, of what happens when people look ahead. And I'm talking about building projects, specifically church building projects. And I want to humbly let you know that I know about church building projects. In the Methodist Church, it goes something like this. People have a vision, something that they feel God is wanting them to do. Maybe it's a need, maybe it's a hope. Committees are formed. We're Methodist. Committees are formed. They talk about it, they agree to it, and so they take it to a big committee called a church conference. The idea is ratified. Yeah, let's explore it. Building committees formed. They get requests for proposals. A generosity team is formed to start raising money or find out financial feasibility of it. After a while, all these committees make their decisions. They bring it to another church conference where it's all voted upon. And with that, then they have the go-ahead. They start raising the money. They start finalizing the building plans. And then they decide how much they have to cut off from the building plans because of the money. Always happens that way. Finally, It's done, so construction is started, and it will be completed several months after they said it would be completed. That's because of rain, weather, and change orders. Finally, it's done. And for the senior pastor, the chair of the building committee, and for the head of the fundraising group, those three people, because of this building project, will have lost 5 years off their life expectancy. Guaranteed. It's the way it is. It's an arduous process. Exciting, but arduous. I'm saying all this to let you know about how different and unique the very first building project of the Hebrew people was. This first building project that is recorded in the Bible takes place while the people of Israel, the Hebrews, were still wandering in the wilderness, actually. It was decided that they would build a tabernacle. Now, tabernacle was a moving church, if you will. An artist rendering of the tabernacle looks like this. It would be 15 feet wide, 15 feet high, 45 feet long. It would be appointed with beautiful columns decorated with gold and silver. There would be the finest tapestries. There would be the finest wood. There would be a courtyard of about 45 feet around this moving church, if you will. The idea of this building project is unique in two specific ways. Number one, it only took one committee meeting to carry it off. One. God, Moses met, and there were the plans. The second thing that is amazing with this building project that he had is what you're just about to hear from the book of Moses.
These words are from Exodus chapter 36. Bezalel and Aholiab and every skilled one to whom the Lord had given skill and understanding to know how to do any work in the construction of the sanctuary shall work in accordance with all that the Lord has commanded. Moses then called Bezalel and Aholiab and every skillful one to whom the Lord had given skill, everyone whose heart stirred to come to do the work. And they received from Moses all the free will offerings that the Israelites had brought for doing the work on the sanctuary. They still kept bringing him free will offerings every morning, so that all the artisans who were doing every sort of task on the sanctuary came, each from the task being performed, and said to Moses, "The people are bringing much more than enough for doing the work that the Lord has commanded us to do." So Moses gave command, and word was proclaimed throughout the camp. No man or woman is to make anything else as an offering for the sanctuary. So the people were restrained from bringing, for what they had already brought was more than enough to do all the work.
Now, remember, these folks were ex-slaves. They didn't have that much. They scraped whatever they had before they left the captivity. They moved on with that. And when this project came before them, well, Moses had to say this: no man or woman is to make anything else as an offering for the sanctuary. Well, why would Moses say that? Because of this. So the people were restrained from bringing, for what they had already brought was more than enough to do all the work. My, that has a nice ring to it. For what they had already brought was more than enough to do all the work. Wow. As I rolled my mind back and forth as to what would possess ex-slaves to get everything, give everything for this, it struck me. Their gratitude was wrapped up in a vision. The Two things were inescapable because as they were wandering in the wilderness, it struck them. They are there only because of the grace of God, only because of what God did. They were there only because God loved them when they weren't even a people formed together. God loved them and pushed back Pharaoh, opening the gates for them to Exodus. God pushed through the Red Sea for them. God provided manna, bread, and quail, and water as they journeyed. And now that they had this opportunity to celebrate God's presence with them, they gave everything without even counting the cost. Gratitude wrapped up in a vision, because what they would give would enable them not only to worship and to sacrifice and praise and to pray, but also to be informed by God and to move ahead to be God's chosen people, a light for the world. So they gave, and they had to be stopped from giving. When was our last building project here in this church? Well, we're sitting in it, aren't we? 20 years ago, more or less, 20 years ago, people got together and said, we have so much to be thankful for. Because people before them said, we have so much to be thankful for. So they had the vision of that sanctuary that is now a fellowship hall. And before that, people had the vision of classrooms for people to learn and to grow and connect with each other. And before that, they had the chapel, because people were so grateful for God calling them together and to experience the grace that is at the heart of the gospel. So we're in the midst of this tabernacle, if you will. And every candle that's in that candelabra, and every pipe that's in that organ, and every ounce of wood that's in that cross, and with all the instruments, every one of them, and with the hymnals that you see, everything in this place is an expression of gratitude for what God has done, for what God is doing, and for what God can do. Everything. And that's what's exciting. Because, well, quite frankly, we are here only because people were overwhelmed with gratitude for God. And I love it. There's one young father in this church, and I've quoted him a couple of years ago in a sermon. It's well worth to do it again. Whenever we have this revelation, it is earth-shaking. And this young father was sitting in a pew one time before church, and he looked around, and suddenly it struck him. I am here able to worship, and my children are in Sunday school able to learn about Christ only because someone provided this. They could have done other things with their money, but no, people invested in this building project for people like him and for future generations, and they delayed vacations, and they dipped into savings, and they adjusted their lifestyle, all to be able to give a gift unto God for future generations. That's the latest building project in this church, and even as I say that, I think I just lied to you. This is only the latest physical building project in this church. People get caught up with the bricks and the mortar. Bricks and the mortar are important. But bricks and mortar are important only to be able to fulfill the mission of what goes on in that building. It's very important to know that we are in the midst of a building project now, and it's not bricks and mortar. It is about changing lives. It is about saving lives. It is about shaping lives, and it is about directing lives into an ever-brightening future. That's what we're about. In a couple of minutes, when this sermon ends, you're going to see a slideshow that was developed by the youth of this church. And the slideshow is nothing more than scenes of the building projects that are taking place in this very church. You're going to be amazed because the larger the church, the more the projects. And you will see things that you never knew that this church was enabling. because we're in the midst of a building project, not bricks and mortar, but of impacting lives. It'll be scenes like whenever, well, we have too many musical instruments up here now, but whenever we have that baptismal fount, and that child is brought to us for baptism, and you hear the entire congregation affirm with that set of parents and sponsors that we are with you in raising that child. And it's a building scene where you will have all sorts of children here with all sorts of interesting decorations here in Vacation Bible School or every Sunday in church, in the classrooms, where the children have their faces lit up with the Bible shared with them in exciting ways. That's a building project of this church, along with for youth and for young adults. It is to be intentional about helping them claim a faith that's authentic for themselves, one that will give them a moral compass in a world that's pretty much without direction right now. That's the building projects of this church. Building projects of this church will be to help the families in raising their children to be strong in their morals and their values. The building project of this church is to stand with people like Cindy when her husband has a stroke, or to stand by someone who's just been divorced through our divorce care, or someone who's just lost someone through our grief share, or someone to visit someone who is homebound. That's the building project of this church. Building project of this church is to form and forge an identity for this community where truly we have open hearts, open minds, open doors, and that no human distinction gets in the way of the flood of God's grace for anyone who comes in here seeking a relationship with Christ and with one another in an authentic way. Just read our mission statement. That is a building project of this church. Building project of this church is to dream that we are going to take our ministry outside to another site where there is no church, and we're going to be studying that next year. The building project of this church is to even look more closely at our children, youth, young adult education program so that there is more of a seamless transition as a child progresses through the years. A building project of this church is to be able to reach out hands to the inner city brothers and sisters as well as to the Mozambican brothers and sisters. Building project of this church is to look within this community about ways that we can make a difference, especially in connections with schools. These are the building projects of this church. And they arise only because of the gratitude that we have experiencing together, especially here, as a family brought together by the love of God. 2017, the commitments that we're going to be giving in just a couple of minutes will be commitments of faith that will underwrite a very ambitious building plan for this church that will include some of the things that we started with one. In these last 2 years, as we've been able to take the leap of faith and as we've had some pinpointed new staff with new programs that have expanded and added momentum to the church. And when you place your financial gift, your commitment for next year, would you please do it with the same joy that those Hebrews did? Because that's what you're doing. No difference. Sure, it's about 3,000 years between that first tabernacle and this tabernacle, but it's the same Spirit and the same God, the God of compassion and the God of justice. So friends, when you give to a physical building project, mortar and bricks will decay. But when you give to the building projects that we're in the midst of now, well, those treasures, that building only gets more beautiful. Just look. Just look. Thus are the building projects of this church. With joy, give your offering, give your commitments to keep these building projects flourishing. Let the ushers come forward.